This is Chapter 2, Designing a Healthful Diet, and the following up in depth on phytochemicals. When reading your text, one of the things you should notice is that the healthful diet is defined as a diet that is adequate, moderate, balanced, and varied. So what do we mean by these things? A diet that is said to be adequate provides enough energy, nutrients, fiber, vitamins, minerals to support a person's health. Now, a diet that is adequate in one nutrient may be inadequate in a few other nutrients. So, an important component also of a healthful diet is not only that it's adequate, but that it's also going to be moderate. A moderate diet refers to a diet that has the right amount of foods for maintaining a proper weight, has the right amount of carbohydrates to prevent high blood sugar, things of that nature. A healthful diet is also balanced. This gives us the right combinations of foods to provide the proper balance of nutrients. Right? So we have both adequacy and balance are two important things that work together. The fourth part of a healthful diet is variety, that a healthful diet is varied. Eating many foods within a day has a lot of important consequences. Part of it is psychological, in the sense when you eat the same food over and over and over, some people start to feel deprived. Right? But the other reason is in order to have a diet that is adequate, that is balanced, it is helpful to have a variety of foods. That way you get foods from all of the different food groups or food areas. Now, deciding how to design a diet is actually slightly difficult. Right? Now, there are a lot of tools that are available for people to help design a healthful diet. One of the big ones will be food labels, and we're going to talk in depth today about reading food labels. Right? There's also the 2010 Dietary Guidelines for Americans. Right? There's also the My Plate graphic. The My Plate graphic is something we'll talk about that has replaced the typical food pyramid. And then there are a variety of different eating plans. Eating plans are very helpful if you are trying to lose weight or gain weight, maintain weight. If you have dietary restrictions, whether it be a food allergy, which will be discussed later in the chapter, any sort of dietary restrictions. So designed eating plans can be helpful for that. Let's start off by taking a look at food labels. Now, when we're doing this, we're going to go through this, but there's also a really nice animation in the Mastering Nutrition, also shown in Blackboard on reading labels. So food labels are a requirement of the FDA. These food labels come on any prepackaged food, and they must show the statement of identity, which is basically what is the food, what is the company that is making it. Okay. They must have the contents of the package, a full ingredient list, the manufacturer's name and address, and then the nutrition information. Okay? And the nutrition facts panel is where we're going to really focus our information. So the statement of identity, this should be familiar to you. Here's one example. Right? So this is what we're looking at. It says healthy choice. The net contents, how much is in the package. The ingredient list, this is the ingredient list over here. Most people choose not to read the ingredient list, but it is helpful. Kind of rule of thumb is the more ingredients that are in here, the more that's in the actual food. Now over here, this is the information from the manufacturer, packer, or distributor with contact information. Okay. And then finally, we have the nutrition information. So this label right here, this is the nutrition information label. This nutrition facts is going to be all required by the FDA, and there's different information on here. We're going to focus in on this different information and look at these different parts that would be helpful in planning for a healthy diet. So the first part is the serving sizes and the servings per container, and this is something lots of people forget to look at when looking at nutrition facts. So the serving size for this particular product is 3.5 ounces, okay? And the servings per container is 4. Now this is important in terms of what is an appropriate size of food and allowing for comparisons among similar products. So if you're looking between two different products to see which one has the perhaps lower amount of calories or the lower amount of sodium, you want to make sure you're comparing two things that have the same serving size. If something is half a cup versus 1 cup, that's a big difference. Now the next part, what most people do worry about, is the calories per serving. Now please note this is calories per serving, right? So the calories here, 320 calories, 90 of them come from fat. Okay. those have to be shown specifically calories and calories from fat. Now you should remember from the previous chapter where we gave our brief introduction that carbohydrates and proteins have approximately 4 kilocalories per gram, whereas fats or lipids have approximately 9 kilocalories per gram. Okay? That's going to be an important thing to keep in mind when you're looking at a nutrition facts label. Then the third part of the list is the nutrients. Okay, remember we've talked about all these different nutrients. They're listed in a particular order, so we have the fat first, and the FDA requires that total fat, saturated and trans fat are listed separately. Then the amount of cholesterol. Okay, cholesterol is actually going to be fairly important for people who have certain dietary restrictions. Then sodium will be listed. Sodium would be listed in milligrams, as would cholesterol. Then finally carbohydrates in grams, protein in grams, and then some vitamins and minerals depending on the amount that's in the product. So if we take a look here, here's our total fat, saturated, trans fat, our cholesterol and sodium. These are listed in milligrams. Then we have our carbohydrate. Now under the carbohydrate, there's often a breakdown between the dietary fiber versus sugars, and then the protein also in grams. Now the last part along this side, this lists the percent daily value. This percent daily value, this is based upon an average healthy American's diet of 2,000 calories. So if you are in a calorie restricted diet, this is not necessarily actually 15% of your dietary value. This would be based on approximately a 2,000 calorie diet. And this would be shown in the nutrition facts panel. So if you are on a reduced calorie diet, if you are on an increased calorie diet, your percentages would be different than the percent daily value listed. Now this is all based on the reference daily intakes, okay, or the recommended dietary allowance, the RDA values. Now there's also what's the daily reference values. These are foods that do not have an RDA, and that all comes back to what we talked about in Chapter 1 with the DRIs. Now the last part here, this is a footnote for daily values. Okay? It states very clearly that this is based on a 2,000 calorie diet, and then it gives another example diet of 2,500 calories. Okay? And this tells you how much you should be limiting to. Notice some things are not based on calories, so the amount of cholesterol and sodium in an average healthy person's diet is supposed to be limited to 300 milligrams of cholesterol, 2,400 milligrams of sodium, and that doesn't change based upon the caloric intake. What does change are those things that are going to be producing calories, or providing calories. Now, anytime you take a look at something that might be available commercially with a package on it, you might notice some sort of nutrient claim on it. Right? Now, there are some nutrient claims that have been approved by the FDA, and these are things that are related to different kinds of health and disease. So the way that this is looked at is based upon the dietary guidelines for Americans, and this is going to be revised every 5 years. So most recently was in 2010, so this won't be done again until 2015. And this is a set of principles that's developed by the U.S. Department of Health and Social Services, as well as the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And it's designed to promote health, reduce the risk of chronic diseases, and reduce the prevalence of overweight and obesity. And if you remember back from Chapter 1, we looked at the rates from 1994 to 2008, and we saw that there was a marked increase in obesity rates in the United States. Now, the main recommendations that we are seeing for the dietary guidelines for Americans is to balance calories to maintain a healthy weight. And we're going to talk about how we balance calories as we move through this course. Also reducing the consumption of certain food and food components, things like sodium, fats, sugars, and alcohol, while increasing the consumption of healthful foods and nutrition, and following safe and healthy eating patterns. Now, one thing to think about with this is what's called nutrient density. Okay? Now, nutrient-dense foods and beverages, these are foods and beverages that supply the highest level of nutrients for the lowest level of calories. Okay? So if you take a look at figure 2.4 on page 49, also shown here, this is going to show you some comparison between meals with foods that are high in nutrient density versus low in nutrient density. So things that are low in nutrient density, it's not that they don't provide nutrients, but their caloric ratio is much higher. So they have more calories for the same or similar kinds of nutrients. So if we compare these two very similar looking breakfasts, where we have a cup of cooked oatmeal made with half a cup of skim milk, whole wheat toast with 1 teaspoon of butter, and 6 ounces of grapefruit juice, we compare that to puffed rice cereal with whole milk, white toast also with butter, and then some sort of grape drink, we see that the foods here have a much higher nutrient density. So lower calories, more nutrients, higher calories, less nutrients. Okay. Now this is a good visual for you to see that it's not necessarily sometimes about quantity of food, but rather type of food and quality of food. Now the My Plate graphic, this is an interesting graphic. This can be found at myplate.gov. Okay, this is a graphic representation of the 2010 Dietary Guidelines for Americans. It's replacing the prior My Pyramid graphic, or the kind of typical food pyramid that many of us are actually aware of and more familiar with. This is meant to be more of a visual representation of what we should be eating and the proportions of what we should be eating. Okay. So this is designed to help us eat more in moderation and balance our calories, to eat a variety of foods, to consume the correct proportions of the foods, while also personalizing your eating plan and increasing activity. Overall, this is supposed to help lead to a gradual improvement of food choices and lifestyle. And this goes along with what we said at the beginning of the chapter, that a good, healthful diet is going to have variety, it's going to be moderate, it's going to be balanced, and it's going to be adequate. So this is the My Plate graphic. What this shows is a more visual representation of the percentages or portions that we should see coming from our different sources. Okay, so we have fruits and vegetables. Really, the recommendations are that half of our meals should come from fruit or vegetable sources, about a quarter or a little bit more coming from grains, another quarter or less coming from protein, and then also from dairy. So this is basically what the My Plate graphic looks like, and it's a kind of helpful visual way to look at the way foods are represented. So the food groups that are emphasized in this, as I said, are the grains, vegetables, fruits, dairy foods, and protein foods. Okay. So this lists an example of the different food groups that are the focus, okay, giving also the number of servings per day. So for example, grains, okay, it says make half of your grains whole. What that means is we eat a lot of, in the United States at least, we eat a lot of foods that come from refined grains as opposed to whole grains. So things that would be whole grain would be whole wheat pasta, whole grain bread, as opposed to white pasta and white bread. Veggies and fruits, vegetables and fruits are going to be very important as well. Recommendations are at least 2.5 cups of vegetables and 2 cups of fruit every day, because these are not only very good in terms of having nutrients, they also have things like fiber and phytochemicals and different vitamins in them. Dairy foods are a focus point here as well, things that are calcium rich. These contain, of course, the calcium, some things that are fortified with vitamins D and A. And as far as proteins, the meats and beans leaning towards the lean sides of proteins, approximately 5.5 ounces of proteins a day. And then there are fats. Now there should be a small amount of health-promoting fats or oils every day, and these would be more of the liquid fats, things like oils, olive oil, and then fats found in food such as fish and nuts. Now the idea of empty calories is something that's also introduced. Empty calories are calories that come from solid fats, things like butter, and or sugars that have very little or no nutrients whatsoever. Um, Empty calories are those things that you may want to limit, especially depending upon age, gender, and physical activity. So good examples of empty calories would be like sugared soda. Sugared soda is empty calories. These have really no nutrient value, and it's just basically sugar. Most candies are considered empty calories. Alcoholic beverages are considered empty calories. The in-depth on alcohol told us that alcohol has up to 7 calories per gram, which is actually fairly high considering the fact that it has no nutritive value. Now, how much an individual should eat is based upon things like age, gender, height, and weight, and also level of physical activity. So the My Plate gives what are called ounce equivalents, and so this is a way of measuring what's called an equivalent of a 1 ounce, simply because serving sizes varied for different kinds of foods. So this gives a nice little overview of what would be considered an ounce equivalent with approximate sizes. So whether we're talking about a cup of milk or a cup of yogurt, 1.5 ounces of hard cheese. For the protein foods, an ounce of lean meat, half a cup of beans, or half ounce of almonds. Almonds have a much higher caloric density than, say, chicken, so a half of an ounce would be about the same protein as 1 ounce of chicken. For the vegetables, most recommendations are to try to take vegetables in as natural a form as possible. So whether you have raw spinach or cooked broccoli. Fruits then, once again, the preferred form would be where you get more fiber and such would be in the raw form or the whole form rather than the juiced form. And then the grains, whether you have something like pancakes or hamburger buns, again, leaning towards having more coming from whole grains. Now, the kind of old school or previously accepted My Pyramid do exist, and people do refer to the My Pyramid as well. It's just one of those things that is not as visually appealing as the My Plate. Now, there are certain alternative food guide pyramids that are either for example, children and older adults, for vegetarians, based on different ethnicities. So, for example, this is the Latin American diet pyramid, and it lists things slightly different. It recommends at every meal fruits, whole grains, and vegetables, daily some amount of poultry, fish or shellfish, with dairy and plant oils, and then weekly meats, sweets, and eggs. You can compare that to the Asian diet pyramid, and you can see there's a slightly different organization. Notice sake, beer, or wine are in moderation. That's fairly similar to what we see here. Alcohol in moderation, that's standard. Meat would be monthly, sweets, eggs, and poultry weekly. Daily, if you take a look at the daily diet in the Asian diet pyramid, there's rice, noodles, breads, millet, corn, and other whole grains, legumes, right? But no real requirement for weekly meat or weekly poultry. That's something that's a very American diet, the idea that we have to have meat at every day. Now, the Mediterranean diet is a quite interesting diet, and in fact, one of the ABC News reports that's in Mastering Nutrition talks about, it's called the Blue Zones, and it talks about the Sardinian diet. The Mediterranean diet pyramid is slightly different in that it has lots of fruits and vegetables, and lots of olive oil. It actually has a much higher fat content than some of the other diets. Fish and seafood, poultry and eggs, and then meats and sweets are much less often. Now, one of the things that becomes problematic whenever you're trying to eat a healthful diet is the fact that we are social creatures. And sometimes we like to go out to eat, And eating out in restaurants can be quite problematic, especially here in the United States, where the portion sizes in some restaurants is astronomical. And something that you eat in a restaurant can be equivalent to the recommended fat or caloric intake for an entire day. Now, some of the tips for eating out at restaurants would be to avoid, of course, breaded and fried foods, getting your salad with dressing on the side instead of a soup, steaming vegetables, substituting vegetables for potato or rice, avoiding heavy sauces like cream sauces or cheese sauces, or ordering a smaller portion, such as an appetizer as your entree, or even ordering off of a children's menu. Now, that's not always the easiest thing to do, but it is definitely something that you should be aware of. One of the activities that you will be doing this week is to look at a typical fast food or casual dining menu item or items to actually look at the meal and see how many calories are there. So the last part of this lecture that we're going to go through is the in-depth on phytochemicals. Okay. So let's take a look. This will be in chapter 6. The end of chapter 3, the end of chapter 2, page 68 in the textbook. Okay. And it says, what are phytochemicals? Now, phytochemicals are compounds found in plants specifically that are thought to be beneficial to health. Now, these are technically not considered nutrients because these are not necessary to sustain life. However, it is believed that they are going to be important, especially in fighting some of our diseases of aging. So therefore, no daily recommended intakes have been established, but there have been quite a few links to certain diseases of aging, such as cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, cataracts, and other age-related diseases. Now, the different phytochemicals we see are shown on this nice diagram, which is represented page 69 inside of the book. These are some of the different phytochemicals. These are some of the health claims, which again have not been fully vested or fully evaluated by the FDA, as well as some of the sources. Now, one of the things that we had discussed at the very beginning was how to create a healthful diet is variety, and this is where variety comes in. If you eat an apple every single day, and that is the only fruit you eat is an apple, you're not touching on all of these different possible phytochemicals. So if you eat an assortment of different fruits and vegetables, including your red or deep green vegetables, things like carrots, things like spinach, and you mix in some of the berries, things like blackberries and strawberries, you would be getting not only the carotenoids, but the flavonoids. So this is one of the reasons why we see variety being important.